how that back in around March, April of 2011, that this pipeline company up in Oklahoma could not keep up with the supply of oil that was needing to be shipped out of Cushing, Oklahoma. There was a lot of oil being shipped out of Cushing, Oklahoma, and that they could only handle, I think it was about 10 or 12% of the supply of oil out of Cushing. And I was thinking, well, at first blush, the story didn't talk about exactly where the supply was from Cushing. They were just saying it was in Cushing, Oklahoma. And I was just kind of basically at the time, first blush on that story, thinking that, wow, they must be pumping a lot of oil out of the ground in Cushing or around Cushing, Oklahoma, to have that much of an overage in supply of oil. And lo and behold, a few days later, I thought, I got curious about that story, and I said, where is all that oil coming from in Cushing, Oklahoma? And what I found out on deeper investigation is that since the 2008 and probably before that, independent companies, entrepreneurs, speculators, different entities have built these big giant tank farms all over the country, and Cushing, Oklahoma is one of them. They built these giant tank farms, and they filled them up with oil, and they bought oil when it was cheaper, and they've waited for time to release that oil and try to cash in and make profit, of course. But also, I think these big tank farms all around the country, which, by the way, Cushing, Oklahoma is supposedly only represents about 8 or 10% of the oil that is stored by such entities. So it's only a small percentage. So if Cushing, Oklahoma was needing to pump oil and not having the supply of the pipelines to get it to the Mississippi River Valley, where a lot of refineries are, to get it to the big refinery areas like around Houston and Texas, areas like that, they lack the pipeline capacity and could only handle about 10 or 12% of the oil coming out of Cushing. And that's just one of the locations, and that only represents about 10% of the oil that is stored in the above ground and underground tanks. So that, I think, helped slow down the increase in price at that time in the spring. But I'm also believing now that the NWO is probably going back to their drawing board and thinking, wow, we were really looking forward to having gasoline costing $6, $7, $8 a gallon in the United States. And I think they actually kind of ran into an overhead supply that they may not have completely realized, anticipated, and expected. And then on top of that, you've got the issues of oil being discovered all over the world. You've got a big Canadian find that they're trying to build a pipeline down in the United States, and I think they'll end up getting that done probably because there's a lot of lobbying efforts to create the jobs that those pipelines would bring out of Canada. And let me just say this up front. I love cars. I think men in general are somehow instinctively just love the automobile here in the United States, and we're blessed to be here in the United States where the automobile basically, when it comes to personal transportation, has been king and is king. And I think it's a symbol of American freedom. You know, that old Southwest Airlines, a symbol of freedom. They had the jet on the billboard, symbol of freedom. Well, I think the original symbol of freedom has been for us the automobile, one of the symbols of freedom. We've got a lot here in the United States, but the automobile definitely one of the major symbols of freedom. And I've often said that they'll pry the car out of my cold dead hands, kind of like that quote about the gun. You get my gun out of my cold dead hands. Well, that's the way it is with the automobile. I just love transportation, and I don't think it should matter if we drive a little Yugo or a little mini Daihatsu or whatever, or a Hummer. I don't think in America that's the issue of what vehicle we drive or how big it is or whatever. I don't think that's the problem. The problem is what are we putting in our tanks? That is where the monopoly is. And so that's why I've kind of delved into this subject about energy, and there's a lot more connect the dots that are upcoming that I kind of found out on what's going on with the overall situation with energy, because the oil, like I said, they've been finding vast reserves up in Canada. You've got Lindsey Williams has talked about all the oil up in Alaska. You've got years and years, by some accounts, 100, 200 years worth of oil up in Alaska. And like I said, me loving cars, I don't want to get out of my car. You've got more and more cities trying to put us on rails, actually, literally on rails, like in Austin and in many other cities. That's a big agenda in San Antonio, Houston, Austin, all over the world. That is a big agenda to get people out of their cars. And I'm not 100% against it, but when they want to put us out of our cars because of cost, then I really have a problem with that, because I think transportation needs to remain inexpensive and accessible to everybody here in the United States. And the agenda definitely by the NWO is to put us out of those cars. But the cost of oil is a key factor in whether we remain in cars. But the other key factor is, what are the alternatives ultimately going to be to oil? Because there will be alternatives, and there are alternatives. I don't think we've come upon the best alternatives yet. I think the alternatives yet to come, and maybe they're out there. You hear the stories about the 100 mile an hour, 100 mile per gallon carburetors, etc. You hear all the different stories about ways to get better gas mileage. I really think these best methods of getting around our cars is yet to come. But for now, the NWO, obsessed with control, has really got their work cut out for them, from my perspective, from what I see. And it's a blessing for us that it looks like their work is so cut out, because you've got these massive oil finds all around the planet. You've got a lot of offshore drilling going on in Brazil, in some big giant oil field discoveries there. We've all heard about Venezuela and their oil, and there's probably oil that they've yet to discover here in the Gulf of Mexico. More and more, because of the dilemma the NWO is in trying to control the supply and demand and cost of oil, I really have to wonder about that the Deepwater Horizon accident. I really have to start to wonder about that, because it's interesting how, okay, we've got the Deepwater Horizon accident, basically slowing down and bogging down the Gulf of Mexico exploration, and you've got events like Fukushima that have damaged the nuclear industry. That may be the death knell of the growth of the nuclear industry. And I remember back, not that I'm necessarily a fan of nuclear, not really a fan of nuclear at all in a big way, because we've still yet to figure out a way to deal properly with the waste of nuclear. But it's interesting that the growth of nuclear energy has been damaged by the Fukushima event, and who could blame countries around the world for really wanting to back off and scratch their head when they're looking at developing more nuclear plants, thinking, wow, look at what happened in Fukushima. And then also look at what happened with the flooding in Nebraska with the Calhoun plant, the Calhoun nuclear plant there in Nebraska, that was, by some reports, actually flooded internally. And I haven't seen or read any stories on that lately, but it's interesting to note how that over the past few months and year, we've seen virtually almost all types of energy come under some level of attack, some level of event, like with nuclear. Like I was saying, Fukushima incident, Calhoun incident, and then there was another nuclear reactor up in Canada that had some problems. You've got coal under attack from the carbon emissions angle, and you've got coal. You've got Obama saying that, well, you can build a coal-fired power plant, but you'd go bankrupt. You remember that quote? I know Alex has played that on the air many times. So coal has been under attack for quite a while. Remember back in the 90s during the Clinton administration, when some of the best coal in the world up in Utah was completely put off limits by, I think, a national park designation. And I remember Bill Clinton going there, and he wouldn't even go to Utah to do the speech. I think he ended up in Arizona, south of Utah, to make the big speech about how that this land is now off limits for coal exploration. And the people of Utah were counting on a lot of that taxpayer money, the economic benefit of digging up coal to fund some of their education and all their state projects, things like that. So coal has been under a long-term attack. And then the other thing that I ran across as I'm studying all this about the oil in the spring of 2011. I'm studying about the Deepwater Horizon event. We got Fukushima going on. We got flooding in the Midwest with the Calhoun nuclear plant. We've got coal being attacked by, by governments and the global warming agenda. We've got one of the other things that I learned was under attack, especially with all the European economic debacle, and you've got a lot of countries that are backing away from their heavy spending habits, and one of the victims of governments backing off from all of their excess spending of money that they don't have, or of overtaxation of their people. One of the victims in Europe, and also somewhat here in the United States, is the alternative energies. The darlings that were there, the green energies, and not that I'm necessarily a fan of them. In some of them, I think they're farcical. Some of them, they might work or whatever. But a lot of these alternative energies like wind and solar were counting on big government subsidies. Hence, we had the big Solyndra story, where they had, I think, $500,000, and it's basically evaporated and disappeared here in the United States with the Solyndra story. And now they're talking about, indicting and investigating the Obama administration's activities in helping Solyndra. Excuse me. So we've got a lot of these alternative energies, not that they were necessarily great or fantastic or going to save the world and all that, but it's interesting to see that it's almost like some level of industrial espionage going on to play with the supply and demand and the viability of all forms of energy. I just keep looking at the different things. You've got the wind situation with the windmills, and they're being attacked from some different angles politically to slow their progress down. So basically what the NWO has to do, it appears, is that they have to be on the ready with their attack dogs, whether they be some so-called environmental group of tree huggers that would attack an energy to slow them down and hinder them, or a Deepwater Horizon event, or maybe even now, it makes me more suspicious that all of a sudden you had these nuclear plants. You had Fukushima, Calhoun, and that plant up in Canada, like almost 3 in a row, boom, boom, boom. You really have to start to wonder, and the rumors have been out there of exactly what is going on. In the case of Calhoun plant, they said that flooding was pretty much intentionally done by the Corps of Engineers, and those reports came out. So you really have to wonder when it comes to energy, and we really have to watch in particular, because one way to keep the cost of energy low, which is really key, one of the key factors to keeping our economy at least at the level it's at. Our economy is hurt. There's no doubt about that. Our economy is hurt. It's limping along. I've driven taxis here in Austin for a long time, and we just, as a person in the transportation industry, it's almost like we've got our fingers on the pulse of the economy a lot of times, because we rely a lot on travelers coming in and out of the airport, going in and out of the hotels, convention business, and all that. And just these stories, like, for instance, this past summer with the European economies going potentially in the tank, like Greece and Italy and France, etc. Just those stories hitting the news, stock market news, and all that changes the environment of the economy. So one thing I've learned over the years is if you've got inexpensive energy, if you've got cheap gasoline, inexpensive gasoline, if you've got inexpensive diesel, then that is one of the biggest factors that dictates how the economy goes. And to give you an example, actually maybe to give you maybe more than one example, 2 or 3 examples. I grew up basically and first started driving back in the 70s, and I can actually remember when gasoline was 18 cents